Okay, thank you for being here. What I want to talk about is how to not measure Twitter influence. So I'm a social media researcher. My Twitter handle is flygirl2. And when you work in the social media field and you research, there's always big buzzwords. Academics love buzzwords. I think industry loves buzzwords. And one of the key buzzwords now is measuring things in real time. So it's not just very large data sets, but how do you deal with them in real time? So Bitly, the shortener, URL shortener, for example, now has a real-time platform as well. What is being shared in real time? A big buzzword. Big data. Huge, big buzzword. Everyone's talking about big data. How can we exploit big data? What does it mean? How can we measure society through these online traces of big data and linked data? Mobile. Dale talked about this already. Lots of speculation about mobile. Where is mobile going next? Twitter has mobile in its DNA. So Twitter is always tipped as the company that's going to be able to adopt and adapt this in this mobile market extremely well. Facebook, on the other hand, is a website, effectively. It hasn't got mobile in its DNA. So there's always a speculation about, how are these companies going to develop? The next big thing. Geolocation, geotagging, another very kind of big, buzzy thing. At the moment, something like 3% of tweets are geo-tagged. And of course, Twitter and companies harvesting data on a large scale would like us to all tell everyone where we are, because this is very, very valuable data. So geolocation data is another big buzzword. Streaming. Where are these companies going next? What's going to happen to Bambuser, Ustream, and so on? How are we going to continue to share information about our world? So streaming is another very big one. The one I want to talk about today is influence, and particularly social influence. We love measuring things. We love measuring in terms of where do we rank in the top 1,000, top 100? Where is our company? Where am I as a person? Where is my personal brand? So ranking is something we've always done. The whole internet is based on ranking. PageRank, runs everything. PageRank shapes our life, the Google algorithm. So I'm very interested in how influence plays out in social media spaces. So two big companies that I want to talk about. One is Cloud. I don't know if you've heard of Cloud, but they produce the Cloud Score. And the other one is Peer Index. So these are two social measure companies that look at social media data and kind of produce a score for you. And that score is increasingly becoming important in terms of your own influence and your ability in the offline world to kind of use these scores. And I just want to kind of take you on a little bit of a journey of my own Cloud Score and my own Peer Index. Before I do that, it's also interesting that a company like Twitter itself has a lot of measures whereby it allows you to not follow more than a certain number of people if you haven't got enough followers yourself. So I recently found out that I got capped at 2,000 people I'm allowed to follow. So then I looked and I went to the Twitter Help Center and I thought, what's going on here? So I have something like 1,600 and something followers, but that means I can't follow any more people because I might be a spam bot. Right? So very aggressive following is not appreciated on Twitter. So they have this thing called a followers to following ratio, and they're not clear at all about how this works. But what they tell you is that you cannot have more than 2,000 people you follow if you haven't got enough followers. So there is something about influence and measuring going on in Twitter itself. So I had permission of a couple of friends, Jennifer Jones and John, to compare how they are allowed to follow more people. So JJ's got 3,300 people she follows, but she is then, or 3,300 that she follows, and she has a lot of followers. So she has 3,500 followers, which means that she is allowed by Twitter to follow more people herself. John, on the other hand, doesn't follow that many people, 975, but he has a lot of people following him. So he has over 3,000 followers. So these are just some glimpses in terms of how Twitter as a platform deals with these following ratios. Now, then onto the Cloud Score. So my Cloud Score is 52. I don't know if anyone here is registered on Cloud and knows their score, but I became very interested in what this score means. So my score is 52, And according to the business literature on this, a score over 50 or over 40 suggests a strong but niche following. So the threshold is kind of 40, and then if you have over 50, then you're seen as more important, and all sorts of perks and free swag might come your way. So my score is 52, and they talk about that it's much more about engagement. So another buzzword I could have put in here in terms of the social space is engagement. It's not so much about getting lots and lots of followers. These are kind of old metrics where, things like view counts on YouTube videos, they don't really tell you so much. So it's very much about engagement. What do these numbers then actually mean? So engagement is a really important additional metric. So they also tell you that through their algorithm, they can tell you what your topics of influence are. So what are topics you know a lot about? So I was interested to see that my key topic is sleep deprivation, and Facebook and community. So in terms of how these algorithms tell other people who might be interested in the fact that I have this cloud score, they might want to find out about me, they come to this profile and find out, if you want to book this woman, she's an excellent speaker on sleep deprivation, which obviously has nothing to do with what I do. So for me, it's very much when these algorithms make themselves visible or how they work and what they tell the world about you. And as these things become more important, it's really important to understand how they work and what they are telling the world about us. So if we look at JJ, apparently she's an expert on fascism. So another interesting one, and I particularly like this photograph. She was on Question Time recently. So Jennifer has a cloud score of 54, and Cloud has come up with her influential topics being social media, fascism, and Banksy, the artist. So I would say social media, they've got right. She's very, very active on social media. She's doing a PhD on social media. I have no idea where the fascism came from. So how this kind of natural language processing is working in the back end of these platforms is really obscure and unclear. John is not on cloud, but a profile has still been created for him in this very basic way that reports a score. So this is where cloud has had a lot of stick from the wider community because they're forcing a profile onto you. In the UK, this is illegal, and so I'm surprised that they are still operating in this way because this has a lot to do with data protection and the way in which they are scraping on a very large scale, sort of giant data about people and then saying, well, even though John is not using cloud, he still has this score and he's still influential, and we would still like you to know about this. Because, of course, the business model for cloud is to team people who have a high score up with businesses who might want people with these scores to do things for them, to profile new products, to talk about services, and so on. So there is certainly a business model that is about selling on these scores and connecting people, high-profile people, with the right businesses. I'm interested in the algorithm. What is going on in the back end? And I think increasingly our lives are really dictated by algorithms. And of course, one of the key algorithms is PageRank, but every now and then algorithms make themselves really visible. So I had a look at my cloud score over the summer, and I take screenshots every now and then because I'm interested when this algorithm kind of makes itself known. And on this particular day, I think it was in July, my cloud score had dropped by 10 points. And I couldn't figure out what I'd done, or had I all of a sudden overnight become, 10 points less influential, whatever that measure means, but what had happened. And what had happened was that the day before, I'd signed in on my friend's laptop, and she was playing around on my profile. So there is definitely something going on in the back end in terms of IP addresses that were not being shown, that is not known. And that kind of worried me when the algorithm makes itself known in this way, and through me logging on my friend's computer, not my own, my score plummeted. I don't care that the score plummeted. I care about the algorithm making itself visible and what this might mean about how these measures are kind of how they are playing out. So I'm sure we all Google our own name every now and then. So this is, of course, also an algorithm that then ranks how we do in the Google ranking in terms of relevance and so on. So Aaron Zinman at MIT in the Sociable Media Group, he played around with this. And a couple of years ago, he created this really nice project called Personas, where you can put your name in the search box and find out how the internet sees you. So I certainly encourage you, especially if you have a name like Farida Vis, you kind of have very good SEO. Because there's nobody else in the world, I think, called Farida Vis. If you have a more usual name, then this might not work as well. But so I put my name, for the pleasure of the audience, I put my name into the search box, and I took a couple of screenshots as the thing was building and as it was kind of building this profile for me. So this works on natural language processing, and it basically picks out words. So it finds relevant material for you, and then it picks out words that it then links to a particular band on the top band. So yellow is sport. So any word that they have identified as meaning sport, so team, collaborate, even though I have nothing to do with sport, I could see my sport band kind of growing quite a lot. And then you see it kind of developing. So all of a sudden the blue became bigger because then the algorithm had found that I'd worked at a number of universities, that I had done research. And so it was picking out universities, lectures, lecturer, and so on. And the sports started to go down, and the education blue started to grow. And then further things started to develop. So you see here a lot of red. That's on the left. That's online. So the project with The Guardian, for example, The Guardian is red, and then they're online, their website is red. And so all these little bits of information started to feed into my kind of colorful band of my profile. And that's the finished profile. So on in the red, we have online. So my profile is made up of online stuff that I do. Sport, of course. Education is quite big, but so are things like illegal and legal. I have no idea what the algorithm is picking up here, or what kind of words are associated with legal and illegal. And we can kind of laugh about it, but this is increasingly how we are being seen. That are kind of fractured identities, and the ways in which we say, yes, but I also do this, and I do this, and I have an expertise in all these different areas. Increasingly, we are being forced into one identity, right? So in terms of social networking sites with real name policies, this is all about forcing you into one online identity and being able to recognize you across these sites as the same person. And I think these are things we need to really think about critically, what that means. So in terms of this kind of influence, going back to the influence, in the UK we have a list that lists every year the UK Twitterati, and I'm sure you have the same for Holland, who are the Dutch Twitterati, and everyone has a kind of idea about who are kind of big names on Twitter in Holland, and in the UK we have this annual list which The Independent has been running for a number of years. And again, it's just like our obsession with ranking. Where am I on this list of, top 100? And so in 2011, Sarah Brown, the wife of ex-Prime Minister Gordon Brown, was #1, and she had a peer index score of 93. So this uses a different influence measure. This uses peer index. Richard Bacon, a BBC presenter, was #2, and Eddie Izzard, you might know him, a comedian, was #3. And then this year, it came out again, and they had a new #1, Richard Branson, the tycoon, and Richard was tweeting immediately, I'm #1, I'm #1. And his peer index is 93, and Sarah Brown had gone down one spot to #2, and we had a shared #2, Alan Carr, who's a broadcaster, but also a comedian. They listed him as broadcaster, which I'm not quite sure why, but if you look at the top 100, it was a lot had changed from one year to the next. So these lists are very dynamic. And then some people somehow manage to hold on to their community. They hold on to their influence. So Sarah Brown is still high up there. So they introduce more measures. They give you more information than just one score. So they also say, and this is the case for their #1, Richard Branson, they say his peer index was 93, but some other metrics we looked at was authority activity, so how active is he in these social spaces? How is his audience? How much reach has he got over his audience? How many people does he follow on Twitter? And of course, how many people follow him? So he has nearly 2 million followers. So all these different metrics and ratios are all coming in to this final ranking then for the Independent. So this is my peer index, not too bad at 59. And what is interesting compared to cloud is that the metrics and the way in which I'm being measured is much more fine-grained. It's much more granular. So here you don't get kind of crazy things like sleep deprivation, but you get a much clearer sense that I work in the social media space, this kind of tech space, but apparently also I'm an expert on transportation and shipping. I just find it really hilarious how these algorithms read us, and where this natural language processing and kind of algorithmic measuring becomes very visible. Jennifer has a cloud score of 69, and her key topic of influence is sports. She's doing a PhD on social media and the Olympics, so it makes a lot of sense that sports comes up. But also apparently she's an expert on Qatar. So again, you wonder at what point were certain words mentioned for the algorithm to say it's very unusual, or there's a spike, or this is worth listing. So JJ is an expert on Qatar. I'm sure she'll be very pleased to hear this. And then John, our friend John Hickman, is not on peer index, and this is really the difference with cloud. So this isn't an opt-out system. There was no profile created for him. So one of the things about kind of issues around data protection and what happens to your data and how is it appropriated by other companies, this is really where we see quite a big difference in this social influence space between two big players, cloud and peer index. So no profile was created for John, even though cloud had him at a score of 54, even though he hasn't created a profile himself. Of course, these scores are linked to free stuff. We all like a bit of swag, so I had a look at what swag is available for me, and it's things like, at the moment, various business cards or dinners and so on. And according to the New York Times from last summer, more than 2.5 companies, and I'm sure they're talking about US-based companies, are now using these cloud scores to award employees certain perks. And we have to think about this increasingly in terms of getting promoted, in terms of getting a bonus. What is your cloud score? And this is where I'm very worried about things where maybe JJ will get promoted because she's an expert on Qatar. And so I think these are really, part of it is hilarious and funny when these things get it so wrong, but part of it is extremely serious because it has real-world implications and application. This is Joe Fernandez, the co-founder and chief executive of Cloud. And what he says is, for the first time, we're all on a level playing field, on an even playing field. This is a very grand statement, and I certainly don't agree with it. I think what these scores do is certainly not putting us on a level playing field. And so I think these are things really to question and to better understand how these scores come about. Big data. A big thing. Big data is not enough for cloud. They want, and they have, they say, giant data. So when these buzzwords come out, it's always, you have to do bigger and better buzzwords. So now they're kind of pushing this term giant data. And this is from a blog post from this year, from October, from this month, where they're talking about how they have more than 12 billion signals a day that get fed into a Hive data warehouse of more than 1 trillion rows. I mean, that's data on a scale that I can't even imagine. I work in Excel. So, I mean, this is data on an unimaginable scale, processing information about us and kind of churning out these measures about how we do socially and what that means. And those rows of data get combined with hundreds of millions of these profiles that have been created for you. So I certainly advise you to go and check your cloud score, even though you didn't know you had one. You have one. In terms of the work that I've done with The Guardian, influence was another thing that we were really interested in. So there were riots in the UK last summer, and one of the things that the politicians were saying is that social media is to blame. Twitter is to blame for having organized the riots. So what you see is that when a dictator like Mubarak switches off the internet, that's terrible, but when the UK government potentially says we'll switch off social media, that's apparently acceptable. They didn't do it, but it came very close. So this is really a serious freedom of speech issue. So I was involved in a project that looked at the 2.6 million tweets that were sent during the 4 days of the riots. And one of the things we were interested in is this measure of influence. So when you have a breaking news situation, who are the people who can spread that news further, and why? And so I think in a recent case, of course, in Holland Haren, what happened? Who are the key influencers? And so what I worked on is I made a typology of 20 different types of users. I wanted to understand who is social media, who is only online media, who are journalists, who are bots, who are spoof accounts, who are Twitterati, so that I could get a sense of, in this soup of 2.6 million, who are really the influencers here. And it will come as no surprise that it's the mainstream media. The content that gets shared on Twitter is dominantly content from the mainstream media that we all, with our occasional retweet, bump up, and that is why we have on the left-hand side for me the mainstream media with the huge spikes, because we're pushing up this content a lot. Now, also in terms of individual users, I had a look at, well, how did individuals rank? So this is the top 10, and one of the things that's interesting is number 8, who is a user called lawcall888, who has over 9,000 mentions. And I wanted to understand what this means. Well, who is this person? And what happened was that he took this image, and that went viral. So this is from the riot cleanups, and then that image with his Twitter handle got retweeted thousands and thousands and thousands of times. It was picked up by the mainstream media. But for me, an image going viral isn't necessarily influence. It's something happening to your content, but that doesn't necessarily then make you an influential user, or that you, after that event, have this then audience that then you can influence in some way. So I think we have to be very careful about how we understand influence under different contexts. So for me, mentions doesn't equate necessarily with insight or influence. Online influence also is not the same as offline influence, and this is where cloud gets a lot of criticism, and I didn't want to use kind of real-world influence, because I'm an internet researcher, so I'm not allowed to talk about really the real world. But what you get with cloud is that previously Justin Bieber was the highest ranking person on cloud. So Justin Bieber, according to cloud, was the most influential person in the world. And of course, people were saying, well, this is nonsense. What about Barack Obama? He's, the leader of the free world, quote unquote. How is it that Justin Bieber, I hope you all know who Justin Bieber is, he's a sort of teen sensation singer. How is it that cloud produces Justin Bieber with a perfect score of 100 and puts Barack Obama, who has ginormous influence, lower than Justin Bieber? So recently, cloud has updated its algorithms, and it's now looking at 4 times more data points to actually kind of re-rank the kind of Justin Bieber-Obama kind of controversy, which the internet loves. And Justin Bieber has now, you'll be sad to hear, downgraded to a score in the 90s. The other thing I just want to touch on very, very briefly is this idea of independent influencers. And what we saw is that 2011 really was a watershed moment for this individual influencer. And so the Independent, to respond to this in the wake of the Arab Spring, in the wake of Occupy, the London riots, where Twitter had, we don't know exactly what role it played, but we know that people were actively using, and news was actively being produced and discussed, and links were shared on a mass scale on Twitter. And so the Independent came out with a new ranking of independent voices. And so they had a ranking for UK news, world news, and people. And what is interesting is that you really see people here who played a big role in those events. So I really want to kind of think about the rise of the ordinary influential and where this goes next. What is absolutely key to understanding these data is context. You have nothing without context. Without context, I'm a sleep deprivation expert. So what I want to kind of conclude on is really the value of small data. Where do you get your meaning? You get it from small data. You don't get it from big data. You definitely don't get it from giant data. So my clock has stopped on 0, but I still want us to game the system. So I have pre-prepared a tweet for you to boost my cloud score. So you will find it on the hashtag. And I would like us to engage in an experiment to retweet this tweet and to see what happens to my cloud score in this kind of audience of very influential users. And I'm very happy to say, Rick de Fluiter, I don't know if you're here, you are the first person to have retweeted it this morning, so I'd like to meet you, of course. And also, I think we really should, in the breakout session at 12:05, talk much more about the implications of all of this. What does this mean to be reduced to a number of influence in this way? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farida. You seem to pronounce Haren pretty well. How's that?
Ik ben Nederlands.
Oh, okay. Working at the University of Sheffield, but she's born in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So you're trying to boost your cloud profile here.
It's a comment on how cloud works. Yes.
One big experiment.
One big experiment.
Keep us in the loop. I don't know if there are questions from the audience. Please make yourself known so that I can get a mic to you. One question from me is that why did Twitter share data with you? If I ask them, they won't share anything with me.
Yes. Twitter is a company, and it's a brand, and it was just at that point starting a new business model, which is all premised on the sale of tweets. And so, as a company, of course, I think Twitter doesn't mind being associated, however loosely or however, with the Arab Spring and bringing democracy. But that's seen as positive for the brand, right? And Dick Costolo, the CEO, often talks about how Twitter connects people. So it's all about connecting individuals and us living, you know, in the same world through this platform. Then the riots happen. And Twitter is associated by the UK government with something very negative. And some of the images that were circulated on the platform from the riots, of course, put the UK in a terrible light. And Twitter as a company didn't want to be associated with that, of course. So Twitter gave the corpus to The Guardian. And then The Guardian invited academics to deal with it and to analyze it. Because, of course, if Twitter does something like this in-house, people will say, well, of course you didn't find anything.
Right.
But there still remains, I would say, a conflict of interest potentially because they gave us the data. And academics never like being given data to analyze. We like to collect our own data.
But they were hoping for you, academics, to debunk the theory that this was a social media riot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, clear. Well, we're on a pretty tight schedule, so I know you have a meet and greet in a couple of minutes in the domes, in the igloos.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions for Farida Vis, please go to the green space in igloos and you can ask her in real world. So, ladies and gentlemen, Farida Vis.
Thank you.
Vis.